Did you guys see the John Cena heel turn?
Yeah, I hate it.
Why?
But why?
Because it's gratuitous and silly, because it was simultaneously predictable and awful. And like Cena's doing a great job with it. I enjoy Cena. It just seems like gratuitous on the farewell tour if the guy's been a much beloved babyface. It's not like Hogan's going to be around forever like cockroaches. But Cena, I think, legitimately is going to leave after this year, and
I think so.
yeah, I think they'll turn him back babyface before the year or before he leaves, but it's just gonna ring hollow for me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know what I think they should do is I think they should do a segment where John Cena, like they record him going to a Make-A-Wish, but as evil John Cena.
Yeah.
Instead of doing a proper Make-A-Wish, he's just like telling the kids, "You're going to die soon. There's no hope." I think that would be great. Okay, all right. Let's put that aside and let's go. All right. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to our, as of yet, untitled Jiu-Jitsu MMA project. We've got a bunch of people on the line. We'll introduce what we're doing here, but first we might as well introduce all of the people on the call. We're going to start with the bald, egg-headed guy with the bookshelf and the fancy mustache. Who are you, sir?
I would be Stephan Kesting. I run Grapplearts.com, and I've been doing martial arts for more than 40 years at this point.
If you are a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner and you've ever bought an instructional, there's a good chance you, at the bare minimum, checked out Stephan's work, I would say. So welcome aboard, sir. And we've also got Mr. Jeff Shaw from Bellingham BJJ. Jeff, how's it going?
Everything is wonderful all the time, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
Is it really wonderful all the time? I thought the fact that it wasn't is the reason we're having this conversation.
I consider myself a tactical optimist, which means even if I don't believe things are going to be okay, the outcomes are better if I act like it's going to be okay. And there's actually sound science behind this, especially if things are, and anybody who's been in the middle of, like, let's just say 60 minutes of a hard Shark Tank knows if you smile, it gets 30% easier. That's a scientific fact.
Is that true?
They didn't study Shark Tanks specifically, but there is smile research about how smiling makes difficult things easier. You could Google it.
Yeah.
Interesting. I mean,
yeah, we should be like that other podcast with Jiu-Jitsu, and I should just be like, hey, look that up.
Yeah, we need
a Jamie.
Call on
Right.
Yeah. Well, we don't have a Jamie, but we do have a Jesse. Jesse, sir, want to do a quick intro?
Hi there. I'm Jesse Walker from Louisville, Kentucky. Run a school here. I have not been doing martial arts for 40 years, but I've been at it for a while. And I don't feel like everything is all right all the time, but I'm happy to smile with Jeff.
Amazing, sir. And I'm Steve Kwan. I'm probably best known as the host of BJJ Mental Models. I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for about 17-ish years at this point. I think everyone on the call here is a black belt, which is fantastic. But we're not here so much to talk about Jiu-Jitsu. I think if people want to learn Jiu-Jitsu, there's a lot of other resources that they can go to do that. I mean, of course, Stephan and myself produce those, among other things, but that's not really what we want to talk about here today. Who wants to introduce the topic? Do you guys want me to take a stab at this, or does someone else have like a fiery speech in their heart that needs to be unleashed?
So here's my take. You all may not agree with me about things, and that's okay. Diversity is great. Diversity of opinion is great. We all think different things, but the purpose of living in a democratic society or a constitutional republic is that we can disagree, and the things that we disagree upon exist within a framework where we can decide what's best for everybody. And the thing is, although I consume a lot of political news, I hate talking about politics. I think most Americans do. I think most Canadians do. But what's happening now isn't about politics. It's about values. Politics are things like, hey, how can are taxes at the right rate? Should we do tariffs? Should we not do tariffs? Values are, how do we make an economy that works for everybody? And if we can't agree on a values level, and you can apply this not just to economics, but to race, to class, to gender, if we can disagree about politics and policy matters about how we get to the goal, but if we can't agree that LGBTQ people deserve human rights, that's not a politics issue, that's a values issue.
Yeah, it's kind of analogous to the whole idea that we can have policies that come from politics that say whether or not we should do something. But if we're also in completely different information ecosystems, if you are, I'll go back to COVID because it's an easy example. and there goes half our audience. We're not actually talking about COVID, but if you 100% believe that mRNA vaccines are going to cause turbo cancer and that they have been hiding millions of deaths from it, and I believe that none of that is true, then we can't really have a discussion about policy. We can't really have a political discussion saying, okay, should vaccines be available? Should they be endorsed? Should they be mandatory? Should they be mandatory for some people, for some professions, for no professions? Those are debates we can have. But if we don't have the same value, which is try and save everybody's life as best as we can, and we don't have the same information, the conversation just can't even begin to happen.
Yeah. And the challenge that I find as someone who makes a lot of jiu-jitsu content is, you know, the prevailing wisdom in the jiu-jitsu space since the day I started has always been keep politics out of the gym, right? Every gym will tell you that you have to do this. And from an idealistic standpoint, that sounds awesome, right? You just park the real world at the door, and jiu-jitsu is this magical walled garden playground where we can all forget our worries and train. And at an aspirational level, I agree that that's aspirationally what jiu-jitsu is best like, right? If we can just strip all of that away and just focus on training. The reality, though, is that for a lot of people, you can't do that because their existence is to some extent been made political by someone else, and they get dragged into this stuff. Additionally, I would say the kind of people who say keep jiu-jitsu politics out of the gym are often the same kind of people who will continually just spam totally unhinged shit onto their own social media. So they're not really holding themselves to that standard, right? I mean, there's a lot of very well-known grapplers out there who are not hesitant to share their political views on social media, and they all tend to kind of steer to the right. As soon as someone gets a little bit progressive, the conversation is always, we'll keep the politics out of the gym. And I think things have kind of devolved to the point from a society perspective where we can't ignore those anymore. And part of the reason why I wanted to have conversations like this is because I wouldn't feel good about having not said anything. I understand that, you know, one idiot on the internet talking probably isn't going to move the needle, but if things really go south, I don't want to remember my time in the year 2025 as being someone who is afraid to speak up about what's happening because it could be inconvenient from a business standpoint. And of course, with my brand, BJJ Mental Models, it has always been laser focused on education. I don't necessarily agree that we should keep things non-political, like I said, but I think that for many people, they come to a service like that because they want it to be objectively just about learning jiu-jitsu, and I respect that. And so I try to keep that platform apolitical to the best extent I can. And I know that many gym owners take the same approach because a lot of people come to jiu-jitsu looking to escape the real world, and they don't want to be lectured about politics during the 1 hour a day when they don't have to be exposed to that stuff. I understand that. But I also think it's important to speak out and not be bullied into silence because it's inconvenient or because you're afraid of some right-wing influencer picking it up and talking shit about you. I also want people to understand that, you know, if you are in a vulnerable group right now and you feel like the world is coming after you and you train jiu-jitsu and you feel like every person in this sport is against you, I just want to provide some space to people who don't believe that. So people know there still are voices out there who support minorities and vulnerable communities and support democracy and freedoms and liberties. So to me, that's why I want to have conversations like this.
So 2 things, Steve, and I'll keep them short. Number 1, jiu-jitsu has never been free of politics. There's a reason that Helio Gracie and his brothers didn't spend decades in jail after ambushing a catch wrestler that they'd lost to in the ring, jumping on him 4 or 5 to 1, beating the crap out of him with brass knuckles, and then when he's unconscious, breaking his arm, getting arrested, going to jail, and then getting bailed out because of political connections to the Brazilian military. Helio Gracie was part of a fascist movement in Brazil in the 1930s. Jiu-jitsu has always been political, and I think before we lose a significant part of our audience, we need to say that this problem goes way beyond jiu-jitsu. This is, you know, jiu-jitsu, many people come to because of MMA. If you take a look at the situation in MMA, it's hard to believe that there's more that there's a space more fascist and right wing than jiu-jitsu, but I will give you MMA. And then you go to pro wrestling, and it's there as well. So I'm going to say this is a massive problem in combat sport. I don't follow boxing as much, but if we follow kickboxing, we want to take a look at the Tate brothers, one of whom is nominally a kickboxing champion of some pretty small organization. It's there as well. This is a problem that runs throughout combat sports. And maybe, Jeff or Jesse's got opinions as to why this particular area, combat sports, is so vulnerable to extreme right-wing thinking, fascist thinking, and conspiracy theories.
So before I touch on that, I would be very interested to hear from you all about if you all remember, and maybe this was my own naivete. Before coming to jiu-jitsu, I was part of the Krav Maga world, which is, very militaristic and Israeli and yada, yada, yada. But I do remember a time where not only was it like, we'll keep the politics out of it, I didn't walk into a room and feel like I had to wonder what each person's politics were. It wasn't even a thing in my mind. And I remember the day I was at a weekend workshop, and it was during the Ferguson riots a number of years ago. And I overheard people that I trained with for years that it never even occurred to me. And they were talking about hoping that, the police did this and that to the fucking rioters. And I was like, holy shit. Like, I'm surrounded by racists and I had no fucking idea. And that day changed everything for me. And I was really curious whether it was a more gradual thing for you all, or whether you had that eureka moment of like, holy shit, this is a bad space we're in right now.
Go for it, Jeff.
The battle lines became very quickly drawn in early 2020. What else was going on in 2020? Oh yeah, massive polarization due to different tons of disinformation, tons of Russian bots, and malicious actors who are willing to tear North American and Western society apart. And one way to do that is by having two completely different narratives about a worldwide health emergency.
Yeah, and I would go beyond that. I think that it's not just about that's a great example. But I think that jiu-jitsu and combat sports in general are a microcosm of society, and that sort of social media fueled, disinformation fueled problem has amplified so measurably over the last, I would say, certainly 5 years, but I would expand that to like the last 10 or 15 years. When I got into jiu-jitsu, which was 2010, I was honestly surprised by how many progressive people were in it. I expected it to be like 90-10. And for reasons that I think in general, I think there are political and economic reasons for this, but I think there's a lot of testosterone here. There's a lot of individualistic, like I am doing this myself in a violent way that is there. I think that's foolish. And I think that especially American combat sports practitioners should be much more progressive than they are, because we don't have national health care here, and fighters are broke. And if you get injured and you're broke in America, national health care is great.
Ruin us.
Yeah, right. Exactly. The number one cause of bankruptcy in America is what? Medical bankruptcy, medical debt. And so it's one of those things where our identity politics sometimes actually undermine our actual life experience, where it's so important for folks to identify with a team, one team or another. And when the polarization happens, it's worse. And, I do think it's gotten worse over the last, not just in jiu-jitsu, not just in combat sports, but in society. And I got my thoughts on what to do about that, but I don't think we're at that part of the show yet.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think the moment where I really realized this was an issue, like Stephan said, was around 2020. And by that point, I was already a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and I had prescribed to the prevailing wisdom that, you should keep politics out of the gym. And to me, jiu-jitsu was just like this fun adult playground, right? It was my third place where I would go outside of work and home life to meet people and socialize and just have fun. And I never really, to your point, Jesse, I never really thought about what were the political leanings of the people in the room, because who cares? Didn't affect me or anyone else. But then around 2020, things really started to change. And particularly when the lockdown started happening and conversations around vaccination came up, that's when I learned two things. First of all, there were a lot more people than I thought who were like anti-vax and were unwilling to adhere to basic, government advice on how to prevent the spread of a deadly disease. I thought this was a no-brainer. I certainly had never had experiences in my life where people had ranted about anti-vax stuff, but suddenly it felt like everyone in the jiu-jitsu space was just promoting disinformation and encouraging people to violate good public health advice, to the extent that, some really well-known people in the community were like actively trying to publicly skirt, pandemic guidelines, sort of to deliberately spread the virus, just I guess as a fuck you to the liberals or something. It was a very weird, malicious thing. And it shocked me. And what also shocked me was seeing how all of these people who I thought were friends suddenly got incredibly hostile. And I mean, Stephan, I'm sure you, out of all of us, probably have the most experience of being on the wrong end of that. That's when I started realizing, oh, this whole like jujitsu is full of nice people thing, it's an act, right? These people are nice because you're their paying customer and they want you to buy their instructionals and go to their seminars. But the instant they have to do something that is even the least bit inconvenient to them, suddenly you're their mortal enemy. And that's when things like the death threats come out, right? And that really made me question jiu-jitsu as a culture and as a community. But to your point, Jeff, that is not something that is jiu-jitsu specific. It is very clearly pervasive across the entire public spectrum at this moment. But jiu-jitsu is a very interesting microcosm because there do seem to be so many people who subscribe to the far right, probably because of Joe Rogan's affiliation with MMA and bringing all of these people into the sport would be my guess. His power in this sport is huge.
Well, and even if we, obviously politics are going to continue to play a huge role, but I think you could put any female into a jiu-jitsu school 10 years ago when we were not necessarily aware that there's problems in the community, and they could have sniffed it out pretty quickly, right? That we have a whole other set of issues that aren't necessarily, maybe they're related to politics, but the sexual abuse and rape incidents in not only jiu-jitsu but in the martial arts community as a whole is such a deep, dark hole that's been going on for so long. And I think it's part and parcel to a lot of what we're talking about.
I'm going to say the normalization of rape and rape accusations is, take a look at Conor McGregor. How many assault and rape? I think he's got a rape conviction. I could be wrong about that.
He was in a civil conviction, yes.
Civil conviction, meeting with Donald Trump, another civilly convicted rapist, while Dana White, who's a wife assaulter, is welcoming the Tate brothers back into North America.
Literally.
And having press conferences in the White House.
For fuck's sake. If that's not an overlap of essentially rape culture might be the wrong word, but it's kind of the exact opposite of it's the exact opposite of take women seriously or believe all women, which of course was a very, I don't think it was a great slogan, but this is the exact opposite of distrust all women,
believe no women,
and distrust any judge who says that the person that you like is a convicted rapist or it's the exact opposite of that. And of course it's polarization, right? Believe all women, which is ridiculous because some women do lie. We take all rape accusations seriously, but not all of them are valid. And then the exact opposite is no accusations are valid. No, you know what? Even if a judge says it happened, it still didn't happen because we can't trust the deep state.
So the through line to everything that we've been talking about, in my opinion, is where do we go for authoritative information? And we talked about disinformation, and I think the death of expertise is something that's really sad.
Oh.
COVID's a great example of that. One of the things that I saw in jiu-jitsu that disturbed me more, maybe not more than some of the out-and-out bigotry, is during COVID, right? Because the reason we have a system, be it a court system, be it scientific peer review, a system for evaluating what information is good. There's a journalism organization in the U.S. called the Pew Research Organization. They do these surveys every year, and they have found that only like about 50 to 60% of Americans can reliably identify what a fact is as opposed to an opinion. And that people, no matter what your political views are, you're more likely to call something a fact if you just believe that conclusion. That's disturbing. I was at a grappling tournament one time, and this was as the pandemic had eased, and we kept our vaccine requirement is still in place. It will always be in place. But like at the time, a lot of gyms, part of the challenge of that was, okay, there's this rapidly evolving thing, and new public health information is coming out all the time, and you know, and you don't know who to trust. And so one of the, I'm not going to use names, but one of the decent rising grapplers in Washington was, yeah, I'm totally never getting vaccinated. And one of the guys I know who's one of the better grapplers in Washington still is, was like, nah, man, you got to get vaccinated. And the younger guy goes to the older guy and says, well, man, I'd love to have a conversation with you because I really respect you and I really respect your opinion. And it's like, that dude's really good at arm bars, and I'm glad that he had, the scientific consensus opinion, but it's like, you would rather, and the light bulb moment that went on for me is like, people define themselves by in-groups and out-groups. And we listen to the people that we consider ourselves in groups with, even if there's no reason to assume. Like, people come to me for like relationship advice all the time. I was like, look, before I got married to Betsy, I was trash. Look at my record. And you shouldn't be you shouldn't be going to me for stuff like that. And so I think that like my background is in journalism, and journalism is a discipline of information verification. Like, what is real, what is not, how do we critically evaluate through information that is complex? And it seems like these days the answer is just like, well, my friend says this, or the podcaster that I don't even know says this, or a guy that wouldn't give two shits about me, but I voted for him says this.
Well, I think it's interesting that you were looking at it through the lens of journalism. My background before I got to martial arts was very much in the social sciences. I was, a couple psych degrees in, and we have a huge replication problem in the social sciences, right? We run these studies and then we can't seem to replicate any of these findings. So this whole concept of fact is super murky. And then, I don't know if you all heard, it's been in the last, 5-10 years, people start feeding junk articles into these journals to see if they could get them accepted. Yeah. Right. And a ton of them did. So these things that we consider to be authorities, and that we look to as trustworthy sources of information, even for people that really rely, journalists, scientists, that rely on things like facts, even some of those institutions start getting shaky for us. So it's a real problem.
It absolutely is. I think that something, Jeff, that you brought up, which is very, very important to mention and discuss and elaborate on, is that people seem to, they get information not necessarily from who's the best qualified, but from who they like the most or who they feel they understand the most. And from a, primitive caveman mindset, that makes sense, right? You trust your tribe. The problem is people got to understand, like, Joe Rogan ain't your tribe. Joe Rogan doesn't know you exist. He's just a guy with a podcast with a lot of listeners
and a lot of money.
And a lot of money. And something that we have really started to discover over the past decade or two is that, like, having a big audience and having a lot of money can drown out the truth shockingly easily. And I feel like ceding the ground to those people and not kind of having a counterpoint. A big part of the reason why I want to have chats like this is because someone has to point out publicly that, look, the shit is wrong. You guys talked about what I've kind of called like the ethical rot of society, just how we've normalized so much stuff that would have been completely unheard of. I mean, imagine going back to, 1990. Imagine if the Access Hollywood tape came out about like Bob Dole or something, right? That would have been the end of his political career. Now we just shrug it off. Conor McGregor coming to the White House to kind of pretend to speak in an Irish capacity on St. Patrick's Day when he has no business representing Ireland at all. That's a perfect example of this, right? Why does he get an audience? What does he bring to the table? I mean, nothing really. It's not even that it's normalizing these awful people. It's that it's a deliberate fuck you to people who have ethical integrity, right? The only reason to publicly promote someone like the Tate brothers or Conor McGregor, they don't help you in any way, right? You don't need, the UFC does not need the Tate brothers. The only reason to do this kind of stuff is to normalize that hideous behavior so it's not shocking anymore. I mean, again, I look at kind of the big difference between 2016 when Trump won for the first time and 2024 when he won again. And I think a big part of it is just we had allowed so much stuff to normalize that over the past 10 years, there's a whole generation of people who were raised with Donald Trump as a mainstream political figure in their life. To him, that is normal. Like they don't have the reference of, you know, a reasonable left and right person debating, but ultimately they like each other. They just agree on policy. That doesn't exist anymore. It's now.
I don't know that people would even believe us now. Like, do you remember, what was his name? Howard Dean, and how his career ended over like a photograph or something? Like
A scream.
Yeah, it was a scream.
Yeah.
No one would believe that now. Or, you know, Obama's beige suit. Like, it's absurd, and you're absolutely right. Like, looking back at that stuff now, you're like, no way.
One of the things that one negative thing and one positive thing I want to say. A negative thing, I think that the way the political right has been able to take over so many institutions is a decades-long, dedicated strategy that focuses on communications infrastructure. And the culmination of that was Elon buying Twitter. But obviously Fox News plays a great role in that. If you go to the front page of Fox News, like yesterday, Trump's Secretary of Commerce said, hey, I might just cut off Social Security payments, might just shut down Social Security. Went to Fox News. There was nothing about it, but there were all these other smaller things. And I use that as just a small example. And this is a huge problem that I think we did not fully appreciate. We thought that, you know, to your point, Steve, that that the truth will out, as opposed to a torrent of lies swamping the truth that are extremely well funded. And you know, that's a lesson that we have to learn, and that's something that we have to counter by putting out good information and by building like real channels. This is, by the way, a huge reason why the political right tried to destabilize the mainstream media, because I think a lot of older people, they think, okay, and I talk to these older people, and they say like, okay, yeah, but the right pulls and the left pulls, and eventually we end up in the middle. And maybe that was true in the 90s. Maybe that was, I don't know if it was. I don't think it was, but like maybe it was, right? But the center held, where sure, you had your spectrum of opinion on the right, your spectrum of opinion on the left, but the mainstream media sort of, if not adjudicates, gives voice to all of those perspectives, and then we can decide for ourselves, as opposed to now we have these huge, well-funded media propaganda archetypes where you can absolutely just not know something that's going on if you don't conduct a research project every day, which most people are not going to do. The positive thing I want to say, and I don't know, like I think there's a lot of organizing that has to happen on, you know, on the political left, but I think there also, to the extent that there is bridge building on values, I think corruption is that. And so people don't know. I mean, y'all know, but like the younger folks don't realize that we had a president in America that owned a peanut farm. And just so he would not be perceived as profiting from being president, he put the peanut farm in a blind trust. So he couldn't even have the perception of impropriety. And that was normal. That was what every president was expected to do. On the first day of the new Trump administration, they legalized bribery. They legalized major gifts from lobbyists. They made sure that you did not have to have a background check to be an executive branch staffer. They made sure that there were no conflicts of interest that could be pursued. And I think that a lot of these things are little, to use a fight analogy, little jabs to sort of test the limits. Can I get away with this? And I think once it became apparent that laws could be broke, like that, you know, just to use really emotionally resonant examples, not only could the president of the United States commit dozens of felonies, be convicted, and face no consequences, but that 1,500 people could try to hang the vice president, could assault and grievously wound police, and not only not face sanction, but be pardoned for that and for a bunch of other stuff that they also did, that they're using these pardons to get off for. And I think that most people, if they're aware of that stuff, left, right, or center, are going to have a problem with it. I do think that there's just the problem. The problem is awareness on one hand, and the problem is like media silos on the other.
The quote that always comes into my mind, and I'm going to read it here so I get it right, is Steve Bannon in a 2018 interview with Michael Lewis. The real opposition is the media, and the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with shit. So it's about creating so many narratives. And yeah, sure, some people say that the January 6th people were terrorists trying to hang the president, and other people say they were freedom fighters, and other people say they were all FBI agents, Jeff, and some people say that they were Venusian Martians come to Earth to drive us to the next level of existence. Who's to say? Who's to say? And here's this Fox News edited video showing peaceful, just tourists, just walking through the Capitol. Who's to say? So that is an example of an end zone that is absolutely flooded with shit. You got Joe Rogan insisting that this was actually an operation conducted by the FBI or in accordance with the FBI. Like, okay, who's to say? Joe Rogan or, something like watching the actual video of something that's never, ever happened before.
Well,
who's
and
to
they're
say?
taking that strategy that they used in the media last time, and now they're flooding the justice system with it this time, right? And now they're overwhelming the courts, and there's so many things going on. We can't even keep track of all the lawsuits. And did we file a lawsuit about this thing and the other thing? And you can't keep track of it. And it is. It's just the zone is literally flooded with shit.
The thing that disturbs me is that it worked. And
Yeah.
I didn't think that it would be as effective as it has been. And so I think that, Stefan, that you're that's 100% what happened. I talk about this in my journalism classes about it. This is a concerted effort to destabilize the any kind of a mainstream media and just like utterly undermine the independent adjudication of information. And I'm disappointed that it worked, but I can't deny that it did. I will say this is the challenge for the left is um, we don't fall in line as easy by and large. And when I say we, even when I talk about the political left, you're talking about a huge array of people and interest groups that, not all, but generally are independent critical thinkers that are difficult to get in line. You can't get 10 leftists to agree on where to have lunch. But it is but now every conservative in America will tell you that Russia invaded Ukraine.
Yeah.
Or the Ukraine invaded Russia. My bad. I forgot. We've always been at war with Oceania.
I will say this, man. Like, as I guess we haven't talked about this for people who aren't familiar with us. Jeff, Jesse, you guys are American. Stefan and I are Canadian. And man, like I gotta say it. Let me give it like a totally nerdy analogy. There was a show about a decade, I guess, ago called Torchwood. It was a Doctor Who spinoff.
Yeah.
So someone actually knows what I'm talking about. I thought this might be too obscure. So basically, for those who don't know, it was kind of like X-Files, right? So the idea is you got this like shadowy bureau, and their job is to stop all of the paranormal shit from happening. And there was one episode from this show where the plot of the show is basically that there were like alien sleeper cells on Earth. And the idea being is that there were people who were actually alien sleeper cells. And at one point, the aliens just like activated them, and they all went and tried to like kill humanity and take over the world. And what I thought was interesting about this is normally when you hear the idea sleeper cells, right, you think about people who are like deliberately engaged in this. You think about like an Al-Qaeda sleeper cell, people who've spent their entire lives hating America and they're just waiting to get activated. But in this show, the sleeper agents did not know they were sleeper agents. They were basically biological constructs. They had lived their entire lives thinking they were regular humans, getting married, having families, trying to be good members of society. And then one day, their alien overlords pressed a button and all of that got wiped away. And they turned into killing monsters. And why the fuck am I talking about this? I will say that as a Canadian, that's what it feels like most Americans have done to us right now, right? I mean, there are people that I thought were my friends who live down in the States who never ever would have said a cross word about Canada. I have gone out of my way to help them build up their businesses and their reputations. And as soon as Trump started posting this like 51st state shit and how Canada is taking advantage of the US, suddenly I'm getting messages from all of these people about how we got to stand up to you Canadians for abusing us and taking advantage of us. And it's like, this is what I feel like. I feel like you were like this shell of a human being who had no real anchor or compass or sense of identity, and some media overlord pressed a button and wiped your personality, and now you're not my friend anymore. And that is so devastating. Like, I think a lot of Americans who don't see how the rest of the world experiences this kind of news, like they think Trump is trolling or joking. I mean, Stephan can back me up on this. Like, the Canadian U.S. relationship, I don't think will ever be the same again in my lifetime.
It breaks my heart as somebody that lives on the border and has tons of Canadian friends and went to UBC. And as a human, even if we weren't talking about our particular two countries, which of course we are, it would still bewilder and chill me that if you were to, if you were to have said this to anybody 2 years ago, like that Trump is going to say, we hate Canada, Canada's been abusing us, we're going to take over Canada and make it the 51st state. That's a South Park sketch, right? That's not like real. Like, he'll never do that. And not only did he do it, it worked. And I wish that that one day Trump would just rip off the Andy Kaufman mask and be like, I was just trying to see what I could get you guys to do. So
like that teacher who tried to see if he could get all of his students to become Nazis, and it worked, right?
Yeah.
Just to show them that, like, this can happen to everyone.
Have any of the MMA, pro wrestling, or Jiu-Jitsu Illuminati come out with their hatred for Canada yet? Has Gordon Ryan spoken up? Has Dana White spoken up? Have any of the McMahons or any pro wrestlers got on board the Fuck Canada train yet?
I don't know. I don't follow them. Pat McAfee famously went off his gourd at Canada because at a WWE event, he was on commentary and they booed the anthem. I think Pat, honestly, to give him some benefit of the doubt, he might not have understood exactly the sensitivity of the issue, and he did apologize after. But I tend not to follow these people, but I am sure there are people out there who are talking about how Canada needs to become, the 51st state or whatever. And, Chris Hayes, a MSNBC contributor, posted this thing, I think on Blue Sky or Threads, and it really caught my attention. He showed like the American perception of Ukraine by party over time. And basically for a long time, both Democrats and Republicans were like, Ukraine's fine. As soon as Trump started talking shit about them, boom, like the Republican popularity of Ukraine and support of Ukraine just dropped through the floor. And what Chris said is like, he has never seen a degree of mind control like this in the US ever, where there can be some media message that is put out and Trump's swallowers, if you want to call them that, go ahead and just consume it. And then suddenly now they've reprogrammed their brains to think that way. And I think Canada is experiencing a similar thing.
And it's not even particularly sophisticated.
It's really not. That's quite the crazy thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, fascism does require enemies within and enemies without. You can't have fascism without having somebody who's threatening your integrity. I mean, I'm going to do a piece on this. Fascism doesn't mean things I don't like. Fascism doesn't even mean Nazism. Nazism is a type of fascism, but there's other types of fascism that aren't Nazism. That being said, if you want to go to the German example of fascism, Nazism, then it's pretty easy to see how the Jews inside Germany were the enemy within, simultaneously sniveling and weak and barely human, and also incredibly powerful and controlling everything. Thank you, Umberto Eco, for pointing that out. But they also needed enemies without. They needed the Czechoslovakians who were oppressing the poor Germans inside Czechoslovakia. I have a great deal of sympathy for how Czechoslovakia was feeling about 1938, 1939.
By the way, anybody who's listening to this and blanches at the use of the term fascism, I want to say that something that surprised me, which is Trump's chief of staff, John Kelly, called him a fascist during the campaign and gave a whole interview with the New York Times about how he was a fascist and he thinks we should have a fascist government. And it's one of those things that just fell down the memory hole because, and this part of it, Stephan, I think the thing that you read about from Bannon is, I think, so critically important about flooding the zone with shit. Because I could name a dozen things that in any other U.S. presidential administration would be disqualifying, would be front page news, would be impeachment hearings that you have forgotten about. You have probably forgotten how Trump said he was going to put the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on trial, and then in a bygone era, we'd shoot him. This is the kind of thing that an American president does not say, and people forget that it even happened because it's not on the top 10 list of crazy things he said in the last 6 months or done in the last 6 months. And I think the enemies within and enemies without thing is a really is a really salient point. What's peculiar to me is his choice of enemies without. Like, we knew he was going to assault immigrants. We knew he was going to assault LGBTQ people. We knew he was going to assault Black folks, Latino folks. Canadians, Panamanians, and Greenlanders were not on the list, and they're there anyway. And
Canada has to be sitting there right now, like, what the fuck is he talking about us for? What did we do?
Yeah.
Like, what a random attack. But like you said, enemies within, enemies without, right? It is that stirring the pot of rage and anger that allows things like fascism to thrive. And Stephan, you know, I touch on your point. I find it interesting that with all of the name calling that these people do, their enemies are simultaneously bumbling weak idiots, but also mastermind geniuses. Like Joe Biden, according to Trump, was on one hand so weak and inept and sleepy that he couldn't even sign his own documents. But on the other hand, he was also orchestrating some massive deep state to persecute and punish and like, you know, it's just completely logically inconsistent. I think in another way, though, that kind of touches on the flood the zone strategy. I mean, I loathe to admit it because I hate the man, but Steve Bannon is probably one of the greatest political strategists of our lifetime. And one of the things that I learned over the last 10 years was that much of what I was taught about truth and the pursuit of knowledge was not complete, right? I grew up in school thinking that, look, you take two people with opposing viewpoints, you get them into a room, they shake hands, they debate, the best ideas come out on top. That's how we advance as a society. What I did not realize was how easily that kind of structure can just be overwhelmed by volume, which is exactly what the flood the zone strategy is, right?
And bad faith.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You
Right,
throw out
so-
so much stuff that people lose faith in the institutions because they can't tell what's true or not. And once they don't believe in the institutions, why bother protecting them?
So
Jesse, what do you mean by bad faith in this
Well,
case?
You know, if in the example that Steve was talking about, you would imagine these two parties with maybe opposing viewpoints that were arguing these points in good faith. Hey, I have this opinion about monetary policy, and I have this opinion about, and they would talk about it and earnestly believe what they're saying. So much of our discourse right now is in bad faith. They don't even necessarily believe the things that they are saying.
100%.
They know it's bullshit as much as we do.
Yeah.
And it's working.
Two examples to that, one related to jiu-jitsu, one not. Like, it's interesting to me to see, like, my take on the whole tariff thing is that I think Trump may be a true tariff believer. I don't think anybody else is. But I think that the people that are on board and saying, like, oh, yeah, tariffs, they know that this is going to wreck the economy, but they have the financial wherewithal to weather the storm, and then they can snap up cheap assets, right? And so bad faith. One of my like, and I have a solution step to this that I'm not sure about, but like, I had gotten in an argument with one of my jiu-jitsu friends from North Carolina who's super conservative, and he had posted a thing about vulgarity in politics and a lack of decorum, and he was like, "This Jasmine Crockett." And I was like, "Man, do you know who the president is? Do you know who you voted for twice?" And he was like, "Don't try to change the subject." I'm like, "Look, you had never heard of Jasmine Crockett 50 days ago." But for the last 15 years, this dude has been making fun of disabled people, like in public, not apologizing, doubling down. This dude has been, you know, and you know, we could lay, it's not all about Trump, of course, but I'm like, look, man, if you really cared about decorum, you know, and that is what I mean by bad faith. And like, I used to judge high school and college debate, and the best debates are what Steve's description was of what we were all told in school. Like, two people with differing opinions come in, like Socrates said, "Come, let us reason together. You may be right and I may be wrong, but we will get closer to the truth." And that's good debate. The worst debate is, I have a list of 10 things that are bad about you, and many of that stuff contradicts the other stuff. You are weak and sniveling, but you are also incredibly powerful and terribly cunning and have my best, but you're also a pathetic loser. And these are terrible debates to listen to because it brings all the intelligence down. Because how do you, in good faith, engage with arguments that contradict each other? You can't without contradicting yourself. And so it undermines discourse, and discourse is essential to democracy. And who wants to undermine discourse? People who don't actually believe in democracy. Interesting. It's been interesting to watch Elon talk about, like, sees the "we are trying to save democracy" rhetoric. Like, these judges. Who has judges in a democratic in a constitution?
Well, this is another great example of kind of every time they take a step forward, if you don't push back, they normalize that land they've taken, right? And now the step that they're taking is the courts are illegitimate. That's very clearly the argument they're trying to make. And if they allow that to normalize, even if Trump doesn't at some point directly, defy a court order, which he arguably has already done, even if he doesn't do that, if it creates a chilling effect where no one is willing to stand up to him due to fear of consequences, he might as well have defied a court order, right? If he can just bully them into silence. And I read a great quote somewhere about how, like, when fascism takes over and authoritarianism takes over, it's not always because, like, the Nazis marched in the streets and took it over by force. A lot of the time it's just by attrition, right? They just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and taking an inch and taking an inch, and there's never enough pushback. Right? Every time they take 1 inch forward, people give them the benefit of the doubt and let them have that inch. And then they take another inch forward, and then people give them the benefit of the doubt. And it gets to the point where it's just so much has been normalized because we've allowed it to normalize. We never pushed back, that now we've lost everything. And it feels like we're about 90% of the way that way in terms of, like, Western democracy, right? We have allowed so much to normalize that never should have been normalized.
Yeah. So let me push back on this a little bit, in specifically talking about the justice system. Because, I can speak personally. I have definitely felt in the last 5-6 years the illegitimacy of the U.S. justice system, right? Between blocking nominees to the Supreme Court and all of that gaming. So there's a lot of us on the left between, like, why is some redneck in Texas able to block mifepristone from being available nationwide? Like, we were having those same conversations, but we were having them in the spirit of, why are these people allowed to do this and hurt the entire nation? And now that's kind of being flipped on its head. Why are these judges able to do this and blocking us from doing things that make us more powerful and help our rich friends become richer? So, I mean, I think it gets murky because we've had a lot of the same feelings, but I feel like, again, ours was kind of in good faith and for a good reason. But that's easy to say when you're...
This is what disturbs me the most, is that y'all know what the Overton window is, or that term, which is like, the window of mainstream, what is politically possible. And the thing is, I am a leftist. The Democratic Party does not represent my views. I do vote for Democrats because, as mostly a holding action, but I am not a person that is comfortable being like, the mainstream media is great. Yay for the government. You know who I love? Judges. And yet, right? So what's chilling to me is that, like, being forced to defend those essential elements of any kind of constitutional government should be the job of the center, but the center's been destroyed or pulled to the right. And so, as someone who is politically left, who thinks national health care is a human right, who thinks that we should get money entirely out of politics, who thinks that, a bunch of things that are like, I think would be better for everybody. Instead, I'm like, it's weird to me, and this is entirely part of the Republican strategy, is offense, 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 never apologize, never explain, never compromise. And so that pulls us to, instead of when I should be advocating for abortion on demand without apology, I'm like, hey, the federal courts are really important. The rule of law is important. And I believe that, but it's all part of a, it's just a strategic way for them to outflank any kind of social progress.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I feel like we all feel like we're being put in a position where we need to defend the institutions, when we really should be having a conversation of, hey, we know all this shit's broken. Should we try to reform it, or should we just burn it the fuck down? And burning it the fuck down is not the move. I mean, I think that's becoming very clear over the last, how long has it been, 60 days?
The amount of nihilism that seems to be driving all of it, that's the thing that really gets to me. I mean, of course, I don't have a time machine. I can't go back to Nazi Germany to gauge what the vibe was like then. But the thing that really surprises me about this is that the nihilism and the amount of cruelty in what's being done is the thing that stands out. Like, it would be one thing if, I don't know, some authoritarian got into the White House and tried to militarize and take over the country by force. Like, I could I mean, obviously I'm against that, but at least I can understand the rationality. I don't understand why you need to like take a bunch of clearly innocent people, deport them out of the country into some shithole jail when they've clearly done nothing wrong. And not just that, but like post on the official White House Twitter like jokes about it and how it's funny and it's great. The intentional cruelty is the thing that really surprises me more than anything. Just the nihilism and the sadism that seems to be kind of driving this political movement is the grossest part for me. Not even just the policy, but the gleeful cruelty is the hardest thing for me to swallow.
I think if you look at history, there are many examples of gleeful cruelty, right? I mean, what's the Colosseum? What's people being murdered by animals, slaves being murdered by gladiators, gladiators murdering each other, or just the executions at the beginning of the show that weren't very popular because they were just executions. They weren't creative executions. Or going to a good old hanging or a good old witch burning, right? This is very much part of the human experience. It's something that I thought we were past, but apparently we're not.
Well, let's bring it back, right? Is most people's experience with watching MMA that different? You know,
there is the question of choice, and there is the question of consent. Now, how much consent can an 18-year-old fighter give for his 55-year-old future self damaged by CTE? That's a nuance, but in general, people fighting in MMA have given consent in a way that, I don't know, slaves being fed to the lions didn't, there was no consent there, or slaves being turned into gladiators to fight each other. There was no consent there, or witches being burned in Salem. There was no consent there.
I think I'm talking less about the athletes themselves. The four of us watch MMA very differently than Joe Sixpack does. He just wants to see people get their fucking faces caved in. Right? That to me is that same gleeful cruelty that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I think that's very astute. I think that's correct. I'm writing a jiu-jitsu history. I just finished a draft of my jiu-jitsu history paper for this academic conference. And I will tell you, Jigoro Kano, I think, is the most admirable martial artist, certainly of the last 200 years, probably of the last 600, maybe ever. He's ahead of his time today, and the man died like 80 years ago. And so there was one of John Stevens' great book about him. A portrait of Jigoro Kano and his students has an anecdote where he's given a demonstration and the audience becomes impatient because they're here to see the big throws, right? They're here to see the boom. And somebody shouts, when's the fighting going to happen? And Kano says, I'm here to teach you to win without fighting. And he gets up and he walks out. And I'm like, he would have no patience for stand them up, ref. He would have no patience for it. And I mean, I think him as an anti-fascist is also a really interesting example of jiu-jitsu history when so many martial artists of his era and nation were quite on the other side.
Well, I have a question for you guys, right? Because ultimately we're having this conversation because we feel like there is a lack of this type of conversation within the combat sports community. If people are in that community and they feel like, look, I feel like I have to stand up and do something about this, what can people realistically do? Right. I mean, because look, as a broader society, people are struggling with how do we kind of collectivize and stand up to losing our rights. But even just within the jiu-jitsu space, people who are kind of standing, maybe against what we're seeing, they feel very overwhelmed. They probably feel like they don't have a voice. They probably feel like they're 1 in 100 and nobody else shares their opinions. I mean, I hope that by putting this out at the bare minimum, we show people that there are people out there who share these opinions. But what can like a jiu-jitsu gym owner or practitioner do to kind of move the needle and make things better?
I'll say two things off the top of my head. Number one, you can always vote with your feet. In most urban centers, there's more than one club, and many, oftentimes there's the club in the city. I know like Jesse runs the club. That's the progressive club. I would have, so does Jeff, right? So there is usually the progressive club in a city. Vote with your feet, vote with your dollars. And it's not always signaled. Sometimes it's signaled by things like, hey, we are a welcoming space, which is code for if you're gay, show up, we're not going to make fun of you. Or, trans or whatever. people of color. So vote with your feet. In terms of getting militant about it, man, that's a tricky thing. Like, I would not have agreed to do this conversation if this had been aired before my going to the States to do my last book signing for that book up there. I just got back yesterday, and I've never crossed the border before, making a plan with my wife saying, hey, if I don't text you from the other side of the border, here's who to call. Here's what to tell them, and then tell my publisher, and then do this, and then do that. I had to borrow Jeff's computer because I didn't want to bring my computer. I didn't want that to get confiscated. I had to get an Android burner phone. Now, I have the privilege of living in Canada, which for now is not the 51st state. And like you, I've made peace with never going back to the States under the current administration for however long that lasts. By the way, the fascist administration in Italy lasted from 1922 to 1945. So I might be pretty fucking old by the time I make it back to the States. So there will be backlash. Like, studio owners who talk out about this, at some point there's going to be a totally random IRS audit coming your way, completely random. And it's just going to, there will be backlash. This is not stopping here. So to the practitioner, I think the advice is easier than to the school owner, because man, are you putting a big fucking bullseye on your back by speaking out against this? And there's no other way to say it. Fascism.
Yeah. And, one of the approaches, obviously that I've taken is being more outspoken about using the school to support the community rather than to shit talk the administration. So, holding this fundraising seminar that we did this weekend in support of a community center that has lost its funding because of all of this. We've all talked offline a little bit about virtue signaling, right? To me, that is a little bit of a beacon in the eyes of a lot of people, like, oh, they're doing that thing for that community center. They're probably my kind of people. Without me having to, put fuck Trump on, on our Facebook page or whatever it is. So I think there are ways that you can walk the line and still also not necessarily ruffle the feathers of the students that just want to come there and train, even if they do agree. But yeah, it's tricky. I'd love to hear what Jeff has to say about it.
I'm fresh out of brilliance, but I do have some thoughts. So let me talk about this from a personal perspective and from a business perspective, because for me, the two have always been the same. Like, I never intended to be a business owner. It's an awkward fit for me, but it's real. And so as a person, I struggle with the best and most effective way to speak out, because obviously I feel some type of way about this administration, but I always want to do the thing that's going to be the most strategic, productive, and helpful. And I don't think flooding the zone with shit is going to work for progressives. I think that we have to be more transformative. I think we have to negotiate in good faith. I think we have to live our values. And the bad thing about institutions being destroyed is it hurts a lot of people. The decent thing about it is it gives us a chance to envision what human institutions look like and to prevent an alternative vision of the world we want to live in. And I think that people are ready for that. And I think people are hungry for that. And so that's how I think about it as just an individual. As a gym owner, I have two answers. And the one is explicit positive signs that make clear that you are a welcoming space and everything that means. I love what Jesse said. I love what Stephan said about both the code phrases and the explicit support of community institutions, that you show, like, look, you're a good person trying to do good. And, here's a thing that I actually think. I honestly don't care at this point who people voted for, in that, like, we are where we are. And at this stage, the people that I want in my academy are folks that are going to act right. And by that, I mean, be good human beings that take accountability for themselves and will hold people accountable that they agree with. Because it's easy to hold people accountable that you don't agree with. It's easy to shit talk people that you hate. But, like, I think of the big problem with this administration and the big problem with this movement is that, nobody on the right is standing up to Trump. And so it sucks that the rest of us are in that position, but we are. And I'm like, the last thought that I have Because I have a conservative guy at my gym who has, a job in a very conservative profession that, that you might be able to intuit, but I'm not going to like blow anybody's spot up. And he asked me about this. He asked me about doing some type of training at the academy, and he's like, "Are you going to publicize or not publicize this sort of training?" As a law enforcement guy, and I was like, what I told him was, and this sounds so simplistic, but I always try to do the right thing first and worry about how the right thing is going to be perceived later. And that gets me in trouble sometimes. It does. But it's the only way to live authentically, and I think that the only way that people on the progressive side will take people seriously is if they know that you're authentic in who you are. And that's the way that you build movements, and that's the way how when the tide is against us, that's the way we keep each other whole and helpful and safe, and helped and safe. And yeah, those may not be satisfying answers, but they're the ones I have. And
Yeah.
I want to punctuate something I think that I heard you say that I think is really important in a time like this. Um, I don't know that as gym owners, especially, we need to be in the business of divisiveness. Um, one of one of the greatest joys I've had as a school owner is watching people from really disparate worldviews come together. I think some of y'all probably heard the story, but I've got a fairly conservative guy who coaches for me some at the school, um, and we've had a number of trans athletes over the years, and he loves telling the story, and it's a growth story for him in that he's like I'm a pretty conservative guy. Before I came to Rough Hands, I'd never even met a trans person before, and now I've got this really cool story where I learned to tie a bow tie, this really kind of masculine whatever. I learned to tie this bow tie from a trans man and a person of color at that. And
that's
and
awesome.
the fact that this is this big growth thing for him, that if I had been real stringent about, I don't want fucking conservatives, I don't want this, I don't want that,
Yeah.
that would never have been able to happen.
Yep.
And being able to bring people together and humanize them, I think has to be the path forward.
Percent. Yeah. I love what you guys are saying here. We up in Canada, we don't have the exact same situation as you guys, although it's kind of conglomerating that way. Right down in the States, you guys have the Democrats on the left and the Republicans on the right. Theoretically, in Canada, we have more political parties.
Yeah.
So there is still a left and a right, but it's a little bit murkier. However, one thing that I would say as a general observation is that the right is really good at unifying and growing their base and bringing people together and finding what ties them together. It just so happens that a lot of what ties them together is kind of reprehensible in a lot of ways, but
hatred of other people.
Yeah, they're very good at bringing people together. Like, can you imagine? Like, you've got a fucking administration right now that has RFK Jr. and Donald Trump on the same side. That's insane when you think about it. And Elon Musk as well, who was, to bring those people together, and even Rogan. It speaks a lot about their ability to unify their base for right or wrong. And that's one thing that people on the left tend to be absolutely dog shit at, right? They're much more interested, from my experience, in purity testing and in bringing in the right type of people. And I observe that when I watch both of these communities, people on the left are constantly trying to purity test and figure out if someone is good enough to be part of the in club. And that is all very defeatist to a movement. And you bring up a great example, both Jeff and Jesse, about the importance of having a way to bring in people who maybe didn't vote the way that you want or didn't agree with you, right? People can, yes, there's a lot of awful people out there, but from my experience talking to Trump supporters, like, a lot of them didn't vote for Trump because they specifically believe all of the hateful stuff that he's doing. A lot of it is just, frankly, ignorance and also naivety about the significance of their actions, right? When I talk to a lot of Trump supporters, the answer I get is, well, politics doesn't really matter. I think he's a terrible, reprehensible person, but, he's going to leave me alone and the Democrats won't do that. So, like, this is not a position based on hate. This is a position based on ignorance and naivety. And if you draw up a wall, a permanent wall, and say, I will never talk to you, then you have no way of ever bringing that person back to your side of the fence. You've doomed them to forever be on the other side. Something that I've learned in the martial arts, right, which I'm sure you guys would agree with, is if you want to win a fight, it's often a good idea to make sure that you give the other person an out, right? Like, you know, we know this in jiu-jitsu. You know, yes, I guess theoretically you could kill someone with a rear naked choke, but it's never going to happen, right? Your goal is not to kill the person with an arm bar or an omoplata. Your goal is to end the fight. And in order to really do that, you need to convince the other person that it's time to stop fighting. If I put you in a rear naked choke, right, unless I'm willing to actually kill you, at some point I'm going to let that go. And what's going to happen then? Are you going to get back up and start fighting me again, right? If you think this is a fight to the death, then maybe you will. But if I can convince you that we need to de-escalate and get back together and put this behind us and look, fuck, we all make mistakes, we move on, that's a redeemable situation. So I would say to people on the left, regardless of whether you're a gym instructor on my hardware, but regardless of why you got into the situation that you're in, I think we need to give people an out. We need to give them a way to get back on track with us. That's super important. And so in the way that we engage people on the other side, we can demonize the ideas and we can demonize the people who truly believe awful stuff, but we also have to leave room to recruit. And I worry sometimes that we might lose that.
Well said.
Indeed.
Awesome. Well, what are we going to do, guys? What are we going to do about this? I mean, we've kind of created this first initial kickoff chat, which I really enjoyed. And I would love to kind of keep having chats like this, not even necessarily just with all of us, but, you know, there's a bunch of people in the kind of group that we've created. I'd love to give different people an opportunity to speak and throw out their thoughts on current events that touch on the combat sports space. I'd also love to give people an opportunity to come on and chat with us if they have a story that they want to tell. Because again, like you said, I think that a lot of it's easier to demonize someone if you've never actually met them. And I think that once people start really understanding how, you know, vulnerable communities in the jiu-jitsu space are impacted by this stuff, I think it would be eye-opening to a lot of folks. But what do you guys think about how we should handle this?
You know, I like that idea. I mean, I think one of the most important things for me in this activity is maybe kind of building this kind of permission structure for other people that, hey, it is okay to start having these conversations and you're not alone, and that there is still community out there, that we can connect, and that, you know, even though I don't feel like this all the time, maybe all is not lost and that we can, you know, still claw our way back.
We win in the end. If we haven't won yet, it just means it's not the end.
Yeah. The number of times that I've had people message me saying, thank you for being the only sane person in jiu-jitsu, is indicative of something. For one, it means that people are appreciative of I won't even say right-wing point of view. I'll say alt-right, conspiratorial, fucking nutjob perspective. And that there's somebody somewhere on the other side of that is very reassuring to them. And the other thing is that they don't know that there are other sane voices, because that's always my response. It's like, I'm not the biggest person I'm not the only person here. I'm just the one who's cursed with the biggest social media following. Although hopefully that's going to change and one of all y'all will become the leading whipping boy for random Gordon Ryan attacks.
We thank you for your service.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think this is important because, you know, just the amount of solace that people take that not every jiu-jitsu black belt is crazy. They think there's one. There isn't just one. There are lots of us. And there are down
in a different way.
Oh, yeah, sure.
There's only three that aren't crazy based on this.
Unfortunately, the thing about kind of modern social media and content creation is it encourages shit disturbing and it encourages drama, right? So a big part of what a lot of the big players do in this sport, and this is something that I as a content creator have never been on board with, is they will lean into the drama side of jiu-jitsu. Yeah. And politics is a really easy way to stir up drama. So if you look at folks like Gordon, they post a lot of the stuff. I mean, I don't know Gordon, but I've got to believe that's a content and a marketing strategy as well, right? Because the more absurd shit that you can say, right, the more you can stir up hate, the more it's going to build up your name on both sides of the aisle. And I think that that's just, I like having sane voices in the sport who don't have to rely on that. And I think that that's something that maybe, hopefully people got value out of this conversation. I would absolutely love to do more like this. Like I said, I'd love to feature people in the community who don't get an opportunity to speak out like this. Most of the podcasts that are out there that focus on jiu-jitsu, most of the YouTube channels, it's all about learning jiu-jitsu. which completely makes sense. So you're not going to find a lot of this discussion if you subscribe to.
Oh, you will though.
Of,
you will find Jake Shields interviewing actual fucking Nazis on his channel, and he's a jiu-jitsu guy, MMA guy. So this is only a constraint that this isn't a constraint that the other side puts on themselves. They're happy to talk about whatever and then yell, "Stop talking politics," as soon as we open our yap.
Yeah.
So it's not a symmetrical thing.
And I think that's maybe what conversations like this can help with. I don't anticipate this getting like 12 million views or anything, but I hope it's at least evidence to people out there that not everyone in jiu-jitsu is like a raging fascist. Not everyone in jiu-jitsu hates trans people. A lot of people in jiu-jitsu believe in democracy, believe it or not. And so I'm hoping that at least this acts as a platform for that. Of course, if anyone wants to check out my stuff, we should just run through and promote everyone. I'm at bjjmentalmodels.com. Stephan, how about you?
Grapplearts or Essential Wilderness. I schizophrenic, bipolar, or not bipolar, multiple personality disorder, and operate in two worlds right now.
Inside you, there are two Stephans, as they say. Awesome. Jeff Shaw, where can people find you or train with you or come to your gym?
I run a gym called Bellingham BJJ. It's in Bellingham, Washington, but I also have a nonprofit called the Women's Debate Institute. It is an incredible nonprofit that helps tons of young women become political leaders. It is trans inclusive and it is awesome. And you can donate at womensdebateinstitute.org. Amazing. Jesse, sir?
Wow, it's hard to follow that. So you can find me at Rough Hands BJJ. We're in Louisville, Kentucky. Come see us. We'd love to meet you and train with you.
Amazing. Thanks all. Anyone have any closing thoughts?
I just want to get down and train with Jesse next time I'm in North Carolina. I'll make the trip.
I do too. You know what? Actually, this is one thing I wanted to mention that kind of slipped my mind. I think for many people in jiu-jitsu, it's easy to kind of look at current events as something that doesn't really affect us because it doesn't touch us close to home. Well, like I got to say, a jiu-jitsu MMA gym owner that I know that I've trained with. Just yesterday, he posted and announced that, he's an American citizen. He tried to cross from Canada back into the States to see his family. And he was threatened with arrest. So like this is starting to hit home, and jiu-jitsu people travel a lot, right? Especially competitors, seminar operators. And I'm just saying, like, be careful out there, guys. I know that it's easy to think that jiu-jitsu is this tiny bubble and the real world doesn't affect us and we can just ignore it. But like, be careful. You cross that border now into the States, and it's not the same situation as it was even a year ago. Take care of yourselves, I guess is all I can say. But awesome, guys. Thanks for this chat. This is a good one.
Thanks guys.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
Good, y'all.